Do you want something scary, but the movie is no longer scary and major studios churn out only shooters with loot boxes? Welcome to the top horror from independent teams. Join this channel to get access to perks and help us get better. INMOST is a pixel art platform adventure game. The player will learn the stories of three heroes, a stern knight, a little girl, and a wanderer. They went on grand adventures, the outcome of which is impossible to predict. Although INMOST can deal with enemies, it does not become less scary from this. No, there are no screamers and creepy monsters here. The stories of the characters and themes raised in the process of passing cause fear. As a result, we get a rather atmospheric game, which is better not to play for those for whom the topics of grief and loss are painful. Inside, perhaps of all the games on this list, Inside draws on horror the least. There is practically no suspense in it and no screamers at all, but still Inside got into this collection. This platformer takes something different, the oppressive atmosphere. In the world of Inside, what we would consider a nightmare is considered the norm, complete subordination of the will, and without any metaphors of a repressive nature. From what happens in the game, very often it becomes truly creepy. Not to the point of hysteria, of course, but there is a whole section of Inside in which the horror does not stop for a moment. It seems that the words underwater level will not be a spoiler, and they will cause understanding among the players. If you remember, the spiritual predecessor of Inside, Limbo, also had such a section. It was an escape from a spider that could appear at any moment and grab the player for the slightest mistake in movement. What was the disappointment of those who, having received a dose of adrenaline, never met worthy opponents in the future? With Inside, we decided to make it wiser, start more or less calmly, and save the frightening moments for later. This solution seems to be more successful, as players first get used to the steady flow of the game and are punished for being too relaxed. Well, the scenes of the death of the protagonist boy in both Limbo and Inside are considered one of the most terrible. Among the sleep. No one feels fear as directly as a child. Adults, even in a state of horror, retain grains of cold analytical thinking. The child does not yet know how to perceive danger, and his first reaction is to hide. That's what players do in Among the Sleep, hiding from sinister figures, the true nature of which is even more terrible than imagined. Among the Sleep is a horror game with the youngest character of any other game. It's certainly not the first horror movie starring a child, but it's likely the first with a baby. We must give the developers their due. They were able to show how huge the world around seems to the little man, how interesting it can be, and frightening, especially if the mother disappeared, and instead of her two nightmarish entities appeared. Nightmarish because they are the embodiment of the alcoholic decadence that the child's family has undergone. The beast inside. Could Adam, a decryption specialist working for the CIA, have imagined that moving from a bustling city to a quiet pastoral area could change his life forever, and not for the better? Events begin to unfold after the discovery in the attic of the new house of the diary of Nicholas, who lived in the house during the Civil War, and quickly begin to take on a menacing character. To understand what is wrong with Hyde Manor, you will have to unravel the mysteries not only in the present, but also in the past. The project has a great atmosphere, which is achieved largely through the use of 3D scanning technologies for real objects in the visual series. Layers of fear. If the developers are forced to put the word fear in the name of the game, are they really sure about its effectiveness? It would be nice if the game was a discussion about fear as a phenomenon, but Layers of Fear is completely different. No other game on this list needed such a telling name. Well, the game is not only the name, so let's take a closer look. Layers of Fear, in general, withstands criticism, decent graphics, a curious plot, character artist. It was on this last aspect that the authors had a bet, in other words, to introduce art into the gameplay. Let the players draw themselves, even if using templates and patterns, but on their own. How do you use to the role of an artist, if all the pictures have already been painted? Layers of Fear, however, is interesting in that it is the only game in the collection that is directly, obviously inspired by the unfulfilled masterpiece, Silent Hills, or rather a playable teaser called PT more specifically. What's interesting is that Hideo Kojima's short trailer game was so compelling that it left a creative legacy behind. Even Resident Evil 7 looks like it, let alone Layers of Fear. I wonder when a crazy game dev will become a character in horror. IRIS.FALL. Can gears and all sorts of winding mechanisms be intimidating? Can endless stairs cause a panic attack? And the shadows? Is there something sinister hiding behind them? All these burning questions can be answered by IRIS.FALL, an atmospheric puzzle game from Next Studios. All the environment presented here looks extremely disturbing and exciting, and the main character, a pretty girl, also has the ability to move into the world of shadows. As for the puzzles themselves, they are interesting, full of all sorts of mysticism and symbolism, but not particularly difficult. Home Sweet Home. A first-person horror game that scares the player with a classic set of screamers, disturbing sounds, and gloomy environments. And it scares quite convincingly. The tension increases the helplessness of the game character in front of the local monster, which, by the way, in Home Sweet Home turned out to be really scary and unbanal. In terms of gameplay, the game does not offer anything new. The exploration of a gloomy mansion mixed with stealth and solving a few puzzles. Everything seems to be standard, no breakthroughs, and ingenious artistic moves. But the high-quality implementation of all key aspects makes Home Sweet Home, if not the best, then one of the most worthy indie horror games on the PC. Rise of Insanity. A psychological horror with a powerful storyline and support for VR devices is already quite a serious deposit to get acquainted with this creation from Red Limb Studio. In addition to all this, Rise of Insanity offers realistic modern graphics and a creepy atmosphere, tied to the psychiatric science of the 70s, which frightens many of our contemporaries, has not yet completely separated from the belief in any paranormal, and sometimes uses extremely inhumane experiments and methods of treatment. The advantages of Rise of Insanity include, albeit not very original, but rather interesting gameplay, consisting of exploring locations, solving puzzles, and strange dialogues, as well as journeys into the depths of human consciousness, realized as surreal flights through gloomy and bewitching labyrinths, accompanied by frequent screamers. HELLSIGN. The small Australian town of Windsor Heights plunged into darkness, and nightmarish creatures build its houses and streets. The protagonist is a hunter for evil spirits, who arrives in the city to save its few surviving residents from a bad scourge. In terms of gameplay, HELLSIGN is an isometric role-playing action game, with pump skills and a huge arsenal of weapons and the latest gadgets, but in terms of atmosphere, it's pure but horror. Very pleased with the variety of creatures hiding in the darkness of Windsor Heights. The hero studies each of the monsters better and better over time, discovering vulnerabilities and recording the information received in his personal Cryptonomicon. DISTRAINT is a trilogy from Jesse Mackinnon, which is two interconnected two-dimensional games in the psychological horror genre. Moreover, the story proposed here turned out to be non-trivial, intriguing, creepy, and in many ways instructive. And the atmosphere is so strong that even the big horror AAA categories can envy. A separate topic is the visual style of games, which is a chick pixel art, without which DISTRAINT would probably lose half of its charm and originality. DECEIT. One of the most popular online horror action games with asymmetric gameplay. A group of players find themselves in an unfamiliar creepy place and find out that among them, there are infected with an unknown virus that turns its carriers into monsters. The task of the uninfected is to find monsters in human form. The task of the infected is to gradually kill all the uninfected without betraying themselves. How to achieve your goals, everyone decides for himself. From the description, everything seems pretty simple, but during the game, every time, there are all sorts of nuances that make DECEIT an unpredictable and exciting multiplayer horror game. NARCOSIS. Man is a land creature. Therefore, the ocean depths, although they fascinate us with their mystery and unexploredness, at the same time inspire primitive horror, depicting giant underwater monsters and picturesque pictures of death from asphyxia in the imagination. NARCOSIS is a survival horror game that addresses the rational fear of deep diving. In some ways, it can even be called a dive simulator using an ultra-modern spacesuit. Finding himself after a catastrophe all alone in a completely unusual place for himself, the hero must look for sources of oxygen and energy, fight stress, darkness, and his own hallucinations, as well as flora and fauna hostile to a stranger. Although it is worth noting that elements of surreal horror are also present here. Unforgiving, a northern hymn. Fairy tales are not always for children. At one time, this truth was revealed to the world by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, who collected works of oral folk art, including fairy tales, from all German lands in their original form, not adapted to delicate children's ears, and many modern works of cinema, literature, and computer games that use fairy tale material only confirm this fact. In our case, Unforgiving, a Northern Hymn, a first-person horror game created by Angry Demon Studio, offers its own fairy tale for adults. The plot is based on various works of Swedish fairy tale folklore, as well as borrowings from Scandinavian mythology. True, the authors left absolutely nothing from the original form of these works, which brought up many generations of Swedish children, giving them a terrible and even shocking form, appealing to the darkest sides of the soul. Note: if you like games of this thematic direction, we also recommend that you pay attention to the year walk. Compared to Unforgiving, the game is not as scary, rather mystical and intriguing, but also refers to old Swedish legends and Norse mythology. Neverending nightmares. Dreams often become the source of the most terrible nightmares. Moreover, regular nightmares can lead to various forms of mental disorder, which the developer of Neverending Nightmares, a two-dimensional psychological horror game with monochrome hand-drawn graphics, once faced. He put all his horrors and bitter experience into the creation of the game, which already makes it iconic and unusual. It should be noted that he turned out just great. Neverending Nightmares is first of all a very disturbing atmosphere, created by an unusual style in the presence of frightening images. The gameplay is a leisurely wandering through the labyrinths of a creepy dream, in which the player can choose their path, which will lead them to one of several available endings. Bad Dream Fever. A continuation of the Bad Dream line of games, the first, Bad Dream, Coma, was released in 2017, united by a dark minimalist style and point-and-click game mechanics. Like the first part, Bad Dream, Fever takes the user on a journey through a creepy, surreal world filled with fear, sadness, and loneliness. This time is a dead city that has survived an epidemic of an unknown fever, the source of which is disgusting ink. In addition to the new location and storyline, Fever also received an updated detailed picture, added shadow play, and numerous animation effects, which, however, cannot be called a plus. The new polished style, which came to replace Coma's primitivism, which many consider the author's style, spoiled the general atmosphere. Although perhaps this is a matter of taste, but the new game is full of Easter eggs and references to the first part, which allows us to consider Bad Dream Fever a kind of spin-off. The Binding of Isaac. Seriously, is this horror? If you thought so when you saw this game in our selection, then it is absolutely true. The Binding of Isaac is not intended to scare players. On the contrary, they cheerfully and boldly run into each new room of the creepy basement in order to destroy as many monsters and bosses as possible with the tears of little Isaac. What is terrible here? This is cool and kind of funny. However, the game is still scary. A little bit of setting. After all, we must not forget that a little boy is hiding in a basement full of monsters from his mother, who wants to sacrifice him. A little design opponents. Among them, there are truly vile creatures. Strongly, the Binding of Isaac frightens with its complexity. Going through the game again, having lost all your health, is true hardcore. No wonder this word is similar to horror. The Binding of Isaac is one of the brightest incarnations of the indie phenomenon. It's not just created by an independent developer. It was created as an experiment during a developer conference. The success of The Binding of Isaac was unexpected for everyone, both for the creators and for the players. Moreover, he awakened the interest of the game community in the slightly forgotten at that time roguelike genre. Finally, one of the most popular Twitch chat emojis is Isaac's head, Bible thump. Something, and this definitely makes the game worthy of a place in our selection. If your favorite game is not included in this list, write in the comments. Thanks for watching. Join this channel to get access to perks. Subscribe, watch our other videos, press thumbs up, turn on notifications, and you will always be aware of what to play today.